All right, everyone. Welcome back to Sip and Talk. Super stoked for today's deep dive.
Yeah, me too.
We're going to be tackling a topic that's getting a lot of buzz lately. The future of food.
The future of food.
But first, what has everyone been sipping on? Anything new and exciting?
Well, I recently tried this incredible cauliflower dish.
Okay.
With tahini dressing. It was,
Cauliflower. Whoa, hold up. You,
yeah.
Mr. Steak and Potatoes, is trying something vegetarian.
Yeah.
What's happening?
Hey, I like to keep an open mind, all right? It was actually really good.
All right. I'll believe it when I taste it. Speaking of steak, I can't resist a perfectly grilled ribeye. All those beautiful juices.
Okay, I get it. You're a meat enthusiast.
I am.
But what if I told you that we could enjoy those juicy steaks without, well, the steak part?
Wait, you're talking about those lab-grown meat things? I've heard about those, but I honestly thought it was all sci-fi stuff.
Not anymore. It's a real thing, and it's getting a lot of attention.
Some folks argue that eating meat is natural, that it's part of our evolutionary history.
That's true, but our ancestors weren't exactly popping down to the supermarket for pre-packaged chicken breasts, were they? They had to hunt for their food, and it was often a matter of survival.
Yeah.
Today, things are different. We have options.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
We're not exactly chasing down woolly mammoths anymore. We have an abundance of food choices, so maybe it's time to reevaluate our relationship with meat, especially if there are ways to satisfy our cravings without harming animals or the planet.
Exactly. And it's not just about the environment. Think about the potential to improve animal welfare.
Right.
With cultivated meat, we could eliminate factory farming and all the ethical concerns that come with it.
And even Dr. Berg on YouTube, talking about plant-based alternatives and stuff.
Yeah, Dr. Berg, he always has something to say.
So to kick things off, we're talking about meat grown in a lab, right? Like actual meat, not some sci-fi Frankenfood, but real meat from animal cells.
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
So full disclosure, the thought of a lab-grown burger doesn't exactly make me drool,
I can imagine. But that's the beauty of this deep dive, right? We're here to explore all the angles.
Exactly. We're going to dissect the potential of this futuristic food, I guess you could call it. Looking at the environmental stuff, the ethical side of things, and of course, the economic realities. Can we actually afford this stuff?
And that's where we might bump heads a bit. You see, I'm all about exploring these alternatives to traditional meat production, for the planet and all.
Okay, challenge accepted. But before we get into the, meat of the debate, gotta love a good pun. Always. Let's set the stage here. We all know raising livestock, it leaves a massive environmental footprint.
It's
right?
Absolutely. Did you know that livestock is responsible for a whopping 14.5% of global greenhouse gas emissions?
Seriously?
Yeah, it's like every vehicle on Earth just cruising around,
Oh, wow, that's insane.
And don't even get me started on the water usage. Producing just 1 kilogram of beef can take 15,000 liters of water.
15,000 liters for 1 kilogram of beef. Gee.
It's crazy, right?
Okay, I get it. Meat production, it's thirsty work. But what about those, more sustainable options like grass-fed beef or what's it called, regenerative farming?
Yeah, those are definitely good questions. There's some evidence suggesting those methods can be easier on the environment, Picture cows grazing on these open pastures, naturally fertilizing the soil. Sounds idyllic, right?
Yeah, it does.
The big question is, can we actually scale that up to meet global demand? Everyone wants their burgers.
Yeah, that's a good point. I guess not everyone can have their own personal cow pasture.
Exactly.
But even if we could, is it even ethical, to raise animals for food when we might have these other options? And that's where this whole cultured meat thing comes in, right? Meat without the whole moral dilemma.
Exactly. With cultured meat, we could potentially sidestep the issue of animal suffering altogether. No more factory farms, no more slaughterhouses. It's a pretty huge departure from how we've always done things.
Yeah, I'll admit the idea of guilt-free meat, it is intriguing.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a counter-argument here, right? Like some people would say that going meatless disrespects certain cultural traditions.
Yeah.
Like holiday feasts, backyard barbecues, meat's always the star of the show.
Oh, absolutely. Meat plays a huge role in so many cultures. But who's to say we can't adapt, right? Maybe in the future, we'll be grilling up lab-grown burgers and sausages at our summer cookouts.
Lab-grown sausages. You're messing with me, right?
Maybe, maybe not. But seriously, you can't deny that a plant-based burger just doesn't hit the same way as a juicy beef burger.
Oh, right. You meant right.
So taste and texture, those are the big hurdles for cultured meat producers. They got to convince all the skeptical carnivores out there like yourself that this stuff is worth swapping your steak for.
Convince me. They've got a long way to go.
Yeah. Well, remember when everyone thought electric cars were just a fad? Now they're everywhere. Change takes time, but I think as technology improves and more people become aware of the benefits, cultivated meat has the potential to become a mainstream option.
I hope you're right. But what about those folks who are absolutely devoted to traditional meat? Are they just out of luck in this future food landscape?
Not necessarily. Remember, there are other alternatives emerging as well, like plant-based meats.
Okay.
And wait for it, insect protein.
Okay, hold on. You're telling me people are actually eating bugs?
Yeah.
Like crickets and grasshoppers and stuff?
Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm ready for that.
I know it sounds a bit strange at first, but hear me out. Insects are actually a fantastic source of protein, and they require far fewer resources to raise compared to traditional livestock.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Swap my steak for a plate of creepy crawlies.
Fair enough. But let's not rule anything out just yet.
Okay.
We've got a lot more to unpack when it comes to these alternative proteins and their potential to reshape the way we eat.
You're right. This is just the tip of the iceberg, or should I say the tip of the cricket leg. Sorry, couldn't resist. But seriously, how do people even eat them? Are we talking roasted crickets for dinner?
Not necessarily. Think cricket flour protein bars.
Okay.
Pasta made with mealworm flour or even cricket-based snacks.
Okay.
The possibilities are pretty endless.
Okay, that sounds a bit more palatable than chomping on a whole grasshopper.
All right.
But even if they do manage to, make this lab-grown steak that tastes like it came straight from the grill, is it even going to be affordable? Like, wasn't that lab-grown chicken in Singapore, like, ridiculously expensive?
Well, yeah, for now, cultured meat is definitely a luxury item. But think about cell phones, right? Back in the day, they were bulky, expensive, and nobody thought they'd catch on. Now, everyone's got one. Technology, it has a way of making things more accessible over time.
Okay, I'll give you that one. But remember that Dr. Berg video? He was super skeptical about plant-based meat substitutes, all that processed stuff, GMOs, the whole 9 yards. Could those same concerns pop up with cultured meat?
That's a really good point. We definitely need to take a close look at the ingredients and how cultured meat is produced, just like with any other food. Transparency is key. People have a right to know what they're eating.
Absolutely. But before we get lost in the sciencey stuff, let's talk about the economics of it all. Like, if everyone suddenly stopped eating regular meat, what happens to all the farmers and ranchers, the whole meat industry? Wouldn't that cause a massive ripple effect?
Oh, absolutely. Shifting to cultured meat would require careful planning and support for those whose livelihoods depend on traditional livestock farming. It's not something that can happen overnight.
And what about, food inequality? Will cultured meat just be some fancy option for the wealthy, while everyone else is left with, scraps?
That's a crucial question. We need to make sure these alternatives are available to everyone, not just a select few. Otherwise, we're just making existing inequalities even worse. And this is just the beginning.
Yeah, we're just getting started. I just want to give another shout out to Micky from Mickytolife. His channel is a treasure trove of inspiration, and he's a huge Sip&Talk fan.
Absolutely. Make sure to check him out and maybe even share your awesome podcast intro with him once you've created it. Welcome back to our cultured meat deep dive. Things were getting pretty heated when we started talking about the economics and social impacts of this potential food revolution.
Yeah, it's a lot to wrap your head around. But before we go too far down that rabbit hole, let's zoom out for a sec.
Yeah.
Like the UN, they've been making a lot of noise about changing our eating habits to fight climate change, right?
Right. They've been waving those red flags about livestock farming and the environment for years now.
And they're basically saying that cutting back on meat could be a big part of the solution.
Pretty much. Their reports lay it out pretty clearly, how much meat production is contributing to deforestation, all those greenhouse gases, and just wreaking havoc on the planet.
Yeah. Okay, saving the planet, that's great and all. But I still can't help but think that, ditching meat completely just kind of disrespects some cultural traditions, In some cultures, a big old steak is a symbol of, success, a reason to celebrate. It's not just about the food.
Totally get that. Remember that article we read about how in some cultures, a whole roasted pig is the centerpiece of a feast. It's about abundance, community, the whole shebang.
Exactly. It's way more than just a meal.
Yeah.
So how do we balance this whole sustainable eating thing with, the cultural significance of meat. It's a tough one.
Oh, it's a tricky balance for sure. But maybe it's not about getting rid of meat entirely. Maybe it's about finding ways to adapt our traditions, embrace some alternatives, you know? What if we could create a lab-grown version of that celebratory roast pig? One that tastes just as good, maybe even better. Wouldn't that be a win-win?
A lab-grown pig roast. Now that's a visual. But I get your point. It's about finding a way to bridge that gap, you know, between what we're used to and what's better for the planet.
We humans, we're pretty good at figuring things out when we put our minds to it.
Exactly. We'd need special facilities, temperature-controlled transport, maybe even drone deliveries to those hard-to-reach places. It'd take a lot of innovation, but I don't think it's impossible.
And that's where the science gets super interesting. Researchers are working on ways to, copy the texture and flavor of real meat. They're using 3D printing, biomimicry, even adding things like plant-based fats to make that marbling, you know, all that juicy goodness.
3D printed steaks. Now, that's some sci-fi stuff right there. If they can actually pull that off, that'd be pretty impressive. Still, gotta be honest, I'm a little skeptical. Remember that Dr. Berg video? He was ranting about processed food, especially GMOs. What if cultured meat ends up being just as processed and artificial as those plant-based burgers he was going off about?
Yeah, that's a valid concern. Transparency is going to be super important here. You know, people need to trust what they're eating. We got to make sure the ingredients are clearly labeled, that the whole production process is open for everyone to see. No more hiding behind the curtain.
Totally agree. We need to know what's going into our food, whether it's from a farm or a lab, but let's say cultured meat is safe, it's sustainable. Will people actually eat it? Meat is such a big part of our culture, our traditions, who we are. Can we really replace that?
That's $1 million question, right? I think a lot depends on how it's presented. If it's this bland, sterile alternative to real meat, it might only appeal to a small group. But if it's framed as a way to keep those traditions alive while being good to the planet, it could have a much wider appeal, don't you think?
Yeah, that makes sense. It's not about ditching our traditions. It's about evolving them, right? Finding ways to enjoy those familiar flavors in a way that's better for the planet.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe cultured meat will even open up a whole new world of food possibilities. Exotic flavors, custom designed textures, even personalized nutrition profiles, tailored just for you.
Whoa, hold on. Personalized nutrition. Now that's something I can get behind. Imagine ordering a steak that's perfectly designed for your diet. Talk about taking things to the next level.
Right. And that's just one example of how this could change everything. It's about pushing those boundaries, moving beyond traditional agriculture, and creating a future where food is both delicious and sustainable.
You know, you've got me thinking. I'm still not totally sold, but I'm definitely more open to it now.
And who knows, maybe in a few years we'll be looking back and laughing at how squeamish we were about eating bugs.
Right.
Or maybe lab-grown steak will be the new normal.
I guess only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, the future of food is full of surprises.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so exciting. Who knows what culinary delights await us down the road? Maybe we'll be sipping cocktails on Mars, munching on lab-grown Martian burgers. The possibilities are endless.
Martian burgers. Now that's an idea I can get behind. But for now, let's keep our feet firmly planted on Earth and take a little breather.
Sounds good. We'll be back in a flash to wrap things up and share some final thoughts.
Okay, we're back, ready to wrap up this cultured meat adventure.
It's been a wild ride, and like any good adventure, it leaves us with, more questions than answers, right?
Definitely. But hey, we can at least try to sum things up for our listeners, right?
For sure. I mean, where do we even begin? It's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, no kidding.
I think for me, the biggest takeaway is that this whole cultured meat thing, it's a huge shift in how we think about food, you know? It makes us rethink where our food comes from, how it's made, and what it does to the planet.
I agree with that. It forces us to face some uncomfortable truths about our current food system. Like that statistic, the 14.5% of greenhouse gases coming from livestock, that's pretty hard-hitting.
Yeah, it really puts things in perspective, and it shows just how important it is to find better ways to, feed everyone on this planet. Cultured meat, it might not be perfect, but it's definitely a step in the right direction.
Okay, you've got a point there. But we got to be honest, taste matters, right? If this stuff doesn't taste good, if it's all mushy and bland, nobody's going to eat it, no matter how ethical or sustainable it is.
You're telling me. And that's why those researchers, they're laser focused on getting that sensory experience right. They want to create that juicy, marbled texture, that smoky flavor that makes meat so good. Remember those 3D printed scaffolds? That's just one piece of the puzzle.
You've got me curious again. Maybe there's hope for this stuff after all. But even if they get the taste right, will people actually embrace it? I mean, meat, it's such a huge part of our culture, our traditions, everything. Can we really replace that emotional connection we have with, like, a real steak?
That's the big question, isn't it? And I think a lot depends on how it's presented. If it's just this, futuristic, high-tech alternative, it might appeal to some people, but not everyone. But if it's about, like, keeping those traditions alive, but in a way that's better for the planet, I think that resonates with a lot more people.
Yeah, it's not about replacing traditions. It's about evolving them, finding ways to enjoy those same flavors and experiences, but, in a more sustainable way.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe cultured meat will even lead to some crazy new food creations, exotic flavors, textures you wouldn't believe. It's about going beyond the limits of what we know. Imagining a future where food is both delicious and good for the planet.
You know what? You've convinced me. I'm still a little skeptical, but I'm definitely more open to this whole thing now.
Awesome. That's what we like to hear.
So, folks, thanks for joining us on this wild journey into the world of cultured meat. It's been a thought-provoking deep dive, that's for sure.
For sure. And who knows what the future holds, right? Maybe one day we'll all be hanging out on Mars, grilling up lab-grown burgers and sipping cocktails under the Martian sky.
Martian cocktails, now you're talking. But until then, keep those minds open, and bon appetit. And hey, if you're craving some real-world food adventures, be sure to check out MickyTolife on YouTube. They've got amazing travel and food content that'll make you want to book a flight ASAP.
Definitely worth checking out.
All right, that's a wrap for us. Thanks for listening, everyone.